The ancient tablet glowed faintly in Rillan's hands. She turned it over carefully, watching the symbols shift and change across its surface. For 3 years, she had studied the ruins on this dead world. For 3 years, the mysteries had only deepened. Around her, the excavation site stretched into darkness. Her team had uncovered an entire city block, preserved perfectly under layers of volcanic ash. The buildings stood empty, their doors open, as if everyone had simply walked away one ordinary day and never returned. Rillen placed the tablet on her scanner. The device hummed, translating the symbols into modern standard language. Her breath caught as the words appeared. "We are the humans. We are leaving. Forgive us for what we have done." She read it again, then a third time. In all her years of archaeology, she had never found a message like this from the precursors. The ancient ones, the first species to master faster-than-light travel, had left behind technology that modern civilization still could not fully understand. But they had never left words, never left explanations. Until now. Rillan activated her communicator. "Director Pesh, you need to see this immediately." Within an hour, half the Council's science division crowded into her small research tent. They passed the tablet between them, each reading the message with growing disbelief. Director Pesh, a tall figure with silver scales that reflected the tent's lights, set the tablet down with unusual gentleness. "This changes everything we thought we knew." "They called themselves humans," Rillan said, "and they apologized. Why would they apologize?" "Perhaps they destroyed themselves," suggested Cora, a junior researcher. "Some catastrophic war or plague." "No," Pesh's voice carried certainty. "Look at the ruins. No damage, no signs of conflict. Every site we have found shows the same pattern. They left in perfect order." Rillan pulled up a star map on her display. Red dots marked 43 systems where human ruins had been found. They had an empire spanning this entire sector, billions of individuals, and they all just vanished at the same moment in history. 20,000 years ago, Pesh added. "We have dated the abandonment to within a decade across all sites." Another researcher spoke up. "What about Earth, the quarantined world?" Everyone fell silent. Earth sat at the center of human space, surrounded by a defense grid that had remained active for 20 millennia. Automated weapons platforms fired on any ship that approached too closely. The technology was so advanced that modern militaries had never dared to force the issue. "The humans sealed their homeworld," Pesh said slowly. "They locked themselves away and left everything else behind." Rillan zoomed in on Earth's location. But why? What did they do that required such drastic action? Before anyone could answer, an alarm blared across the camp. Rillan's communicator burst to life with urgent messages. She grabbed it, listening to the rapid-fire report from the orbital station. "A ship," she breathed. "They detected a ship with human design signatures." Everyone rushed to their displays. Data streamed in from deep space sensors. The signature was unmistakable. The vessel matched the profiles of ancient human military craft, down to the specific energy patterns and hull composition. "Impossible," Cora whispered. "That ship should not exist." The vessel appeared on their screens. It was enormous, dwarfing the largest modern battleships. Its hull bore the scars of countless impacts. Sections of armor had been replaced with materials that did not match any known technology. It looked like it had been flying for centuries, patched and repaired again and again. "It is heading toward the galactic core," Pesh said, studying the trajectory. "Speed is 0.7 light speed. That should tear any ship apart." Rillan pulled up more data. Life signs detected. 3 individuals. The biosignatures match reconstructed human DNA profiles. 3 humans, Cora said in disbelief, after 20,000 years. The Council acted quickly. Within days, a fleet of 20 ships from 5 species moved to intercept the human vessel. They did not approach with weapons ready. This was a moment for first contact, or perhaps recontact, with a species that had vanished from the stars before most modern civilizations had even discovered fire. Rillen joined the mission aboard the Council flagship. As they drew closer to the human ship, she felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. The message on the tablet echoed in her mind. "Forgive us for what we have done." What had the humans done? The fleet matched speed with the human vessel. It ignored all hailing attempts, continuing its journey in silence. Up close, the ship looked even more battered. Entire sections showed signs of weapons fire. Something had attacked this vessel repeatedly over its long journey. "Scanning interior," reported the ship's officer. "Most of the vessel is empty. Habitation sections are abandoned, but there is activity in the central core. 3 life signs confirmed. They appear to be in some form of hibernation." "And something else," added another officer. "The ship is broadcasting, not communication signals, raw data, massive amounts of information." Rillen accessed the data stream. Images flashed across her screen. Human cities beautiful and vast, human art and music, mathematical formulas, star charts, and then the images changed. Worlds burning, cities reduced to ash, populations vanishing in nuclear fire, 3 different species all erased from existence, and in the records the signatures of human weapons. "Gods preserve us," Pesh said quietly. "They were not the first to reach the stars. They were just the first to destroy those who might challenge them." The data kept coming. More images, humans protesting in vast crowds, internal documents showing resistance movements, and then a decision broadcast across all human space simultaneously, a message that had led to the abandonment of an entire empire. "We are guilty. We have committed genocide. We do not deserve the stars. We exile ourselves. May we never be forgiven." Rillen stared at the screen, her hands shaking. They punished themselves. They gave up everything because of what they had done. "But who are these 3? Cora asked, pointing at the life signs in the ancient ship. "Why are they returning now?" The human vessel continued its silent journey toward Earth, and the Council fleet followed, desperate to understand the full truth of what had happened 20,000 years ago. The Council chamber filled quickly. Representatives from 12 species gathered around the central display, watching the feed from the fleet that shadowed the human vessel. For 3 days, they had followed the ancient ship as it cut through space at impossible speeds. For 3 days, it had ignored every attempt at communication. Norrin stood at the center of the chamber. His 4 arms gestured at the holographic display, highlighting sections of the decoded data. As the Council's chief xenohistorian, he had spent decades studying dead civilizations. He had never expected to encounter one that might still be alive. "The evidence is clear," he said. 20,000 years ago, humans eradicated 3 emerging species, the Anari, the Talman, and the Vesh, all destroyed before they could develop interstellar travel. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others showed open anger on their faces. "The Anari left ruins on 12 worlds," Norrin continued. "We thought they died from a natural plague. The data from the human ship tells a different story: orbital bombardment, systematic extermination. The humans struck before the Anari could pose any threat." "Why?" demanded Council Leader Vorn. "What purpose did it serve?" "Fear," Norrin said simply. "The human records show military planning documents. They believed any other spacefaring species would eventually become a competitor. They chose to eliminate potential threats before those threats could materialize." The chamber erupted in argument. Delegates shouted questions and accusations. Vorn raised his primary hands for silence. "The humans exiled themselves for these crimes," Vorn said. "They abandoned an empire. They sealed themselves away for 20 millennia. Does that not count for something?" "It counts for much," Norrin replied. But it does not erase what they did. 3 entire species, billions of individuals lost forever. Another delegate spoke up. What about these 3 humans in the ship? Who are they? Why are they coming out of hiding now? Norrin pulled up new data. The ship is called Dawnbreaker. It was one of the last human military vessels constructed before the exile. Our scans show it has been continuously active for approximately 19,800 years. Shocked silence filled the chamber. That is impossible, someone said. No being can live that long. The humans inside show signs of extensive biological modification, Norrin explained. Cellular regeneration, periodic hibernation cycles. They have extended their lives far beyond natural limits. But why, Vorn asked, why stay out here for so long? That is what we need to discover. In orbit above the quarantined Earth, the Dawnbreaker finally slowed. Its engines dimmed. For the first time in days, it seemed to acknowledge the presence of the Council fleet. Rillen watched from her station aboard the flagship. Her fingers moved across her console, analyzing every scrap of data they could gather about the mysterious vessel. Movement detected, an officer announced. One of the humans is waking from hibernation. On screen, thermal scans showed increased activity in the ship's core. Moments later, a signal came through. Not words, just a simple mathematical sequence, a universal greeting. Norrin responded immediately with the same sequence. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then a voice crackled through the communication system. The translation software struggled with the ancient dialect, but the meaning came through clearly. This is Dan, pilot of Dawnbreaker, last of the Watchers, requesting permission to approach Earth. Norrin activated his microphone. This is Council Historian Norrin. We mean you no harm. We wish to understand what happened. What are Watchers? A long pause followed. Then Dan spoke again, his voice heavy with exhaustion. We are the ones who stayed behind. When humanity retreated to Earth, 3 of us volunteered to remain in deep space, to watch, to make sure no other species followed humanity's path. Rillen felt her breath catch. They stayed out here to protect us. Dan continued. For nearly 20,000 years we have observed galactic development. 3 times we detected species beginning to show the same patterns humanity did. Aggressive expansion, elimination of primitive neighbors. Each time we intervened anonymously. The Kelrath disaster, Vorn said suddenly, 2,000 years ago. Their war fleet vanished before it could attack the peaceful Dorns. That was you. Yes, and others, we operated in shadow, never revealing ourselves, never seeking recognition. It was our penance, our duty. Norrin leaned forward. Why are you returning now? Our mission is complete. The galaxy has matured. The Council exists. Species cooperate instead of compete. There is no longer need for Watchers. We are going home to rest, to finally rest. On the screen, the Dawnbreaker moved slowly toward Earth's defense perimeter. The ancient weapons platforms tracked its movement but did not fire. The ship transmitted authorization codes older than any current government. There are still billions of humans on Earth, Dan said. We have monitored their broadcasts. They remember what their ancestors did. They teach the history to every generation. They have built a society based on the lessons of their greatest shame. Will they return to the stars? Vorn asked. That is not for me to decide. I am just tired. Grace and Omar are still in deep hibernation. We have served for 200 centuries. We want to go home. The defense platforms powered down. For the first time in 20,000 years, the way to Earth stood open. Rillen watched as the Dawnbreaker glided past the silent weapons. They gave up everything, she whispered. An entire species exiled itself, and these 3 sacrificed their lives to protect the galaxy from others who might make the same mistakes. It is the greatest act of penance in galactic history, Norrin agreed. But the question remains. Do we allow humanity to return? Or do the crimes of their ancestors outweigh 20,000 years of isolation and sacrifice? The council would have to decide. But as Rillen watched the battered ship finally approach its home after an eternity of lonely vigil, she thought she already knew the answer. Some debts could never be fully repaid, but humanity had tried harder than any species ever had. They had punished themselves more severely than any external judgment could have demanded. And three of their kind had given up everything to ensure no one else would ever suffer as the Anari, the Talman, and the Vesh had suffered. Perhaps that was enough. Grace opened her eyes to darkness. The hibernation pod hummed softly around her, systems beginning their wake cycle. She had done this thousands of times before. Each awakening brought the same disorientation, the same moment of forgetting where she was and when she was. Then memory returned, 20,000 years, the vigil, the mission. She pressed the release mechanism. The pod door slid open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Cold air rushed in, making her skin tingle. Grace pulled herself out slowly, her muscles stiff despite the pod's exercise programs. Dan stood by the main viewport, his back to her. Beyond the transparent material, Earth hung in space, blue and green and beautiful. Home. "How long was I out this time?" Grace asked. 40 years, Dan replied without turning. There was no need to wake you, nothing required intervention. Grace moved to stand beside him. Her legs felt weak. After 40 years of hibernation, they always did. And now? Now we are home. Dan's voice carried emotions Grace had not heard in centuries: relief, sadness, hope. The Council fleet is in orbit. They want to talk to us. About what? About everything. They found records of what humanity did. They know about the Anari, about our crimes, about why we exiled ourselves. Grace closed her eyes. The weight of history pressed down on her shoulders. And they know what we have been doing out here. Yes, I told them about the Watchers, about our mission. How did they react? Dan finally turned to face her. He looked old, older than any human should look. The genetic modifications had kept them alive, but they could not stop the accumulation of years. His eyes held a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. They are debating whether to allow humanity back into the galaxy, he said. Some want to maintain the quarantine. Others argue we have paid our debt. Grace walked to the engineering console. Data streams showed the ship's status. The Dawnbreaker had held together for nearly 20,000 years, but it was dying. Hull integrity at 60%. Main reactor running on backup systems. She had performed miracles keeping this vessel functional, but even miracles had limits. We should wake Omar, she said. Already done. He is in the medical bay getting his strength back. Grace pulled up a chair and sat heavily. I remember when we volunteered for this. We thought it would be a few hundred years at most, long enough to make sure the galaxy stabilized, long enough to ensure no other species committed our mistakes. We were young, Dan said. We did not understand what time really means, how it stretches, how it changes you. Do you regret it? Dan considered the question. No, I regret what humanity did to deserve this exile. I regret that the Anari and the others never got their chance to reach the stars. But our mission? No, we have stopped 3 potential genocides. We have saved billions of lives. That matters. A communication alert chimed. Dan activated the display. Norin's face appeared, his expression curious and cautious. Grace has awakened, Dan said. We are ready to talk. Thank you, Norin replied. The Council wishes to understand the full history. We have fragments from your data broadcasts, but we need context. We need to hear the story from those who lived it. Grace nodded. What do you want to know? Start at the beginning. When did humanity realize what they had become? Grace took a deep breath. The memories hurt, they always hurt, but they were necessary. I was an engineer on a colony ship, she began. We were expanding into the Vesh sector, beautiful worlds. 3 of them had developed intelligent life. Stone Age technology, primitive but clearly advancing. She paused, gathering herself. The military conducted surveys. They projected how long it would take the Vesh to develop space travel. 2,000 years, maybe less. The decision came down from Earth Command. Eliminate the potential threat before it could materialize. Norin's face showed horror. You killed them for what they might do in 2 millennia. The military did. I was not part of that decision. None of the civilians were, but we learned about it after. Someone leaked the classified reports, showed the entire human population what our government had done in our name. Dan picked up the story. I was a pilot, military. I flew missions in the Anari campaign. We told ourselves we were protecting humanity. We told ourselves it was necessary. His voice broke slightly. The Anari were peaceful. They had developed agriculture, writing, mathematics. They were maybe 500 years from spaceflight, and we erased them. 38 worlds, 4 billion individuals, gone in 3 months. Grace reached over and squeezed his hand. They had told this story before, but it never got easier. When the truth came out, humanity broke, Grace continued. Protests in every city. The government collapsed, but more than that, we broke psychologically. We looked at ourselves and saw monsters. We saw what we were capable of, what we had actually done. The debate lasted 5 years, Dan said. What should humanity do? Some argued for reform. Others wanted trials and executions, but a movement emerged, a radical idea. If we could not be trusted with the stars, we should give them up. Complete exile, Grace added. Return to Earth, seal the homeworld, leave the galaxy to others. Let humanity sit alone with its guilt and try to build something better. That seems extreme, Norin said carefully. It was the only appropriate response, Dan replied. How do you make amends for genocide? How do you apologize to species that no longer exist? You cannot. So humanity did the only thing left. We removed ourselves from the equation. Grace stood and walked to the viewport again. But some of us could not accept just hiding. The military leaders who ordered the attacks, they were punished, imprisoned. But the rest of us, the ordinary humans who had supported the expansion without asking hard questions, we felt responsible too. That is when the Watcher program formed, Dan said. Volunteers who would stay behind, who would monitor the galaxy, who would ensure no other species followed humanity's path. Thousands volunteered, Grace said softly, but we only needed 3. The ship could only support 3 in extended hibernation. I was chosen for my engineering skills, Dan for his piloting, Omar for his xenobiology expertise. And you stayed out here for 20,000 years, Norin said in awe. Omar made his way slowly to the bridge. His joints ached despite the medical treatments. The hibernation pods preserved life, but they could not stop the slow accumulation of damage that came with extreme age. He was approaching his 20th millennium of existence. No human was meant to live this long. Dan and Grace stood by the communications console, speaking with the council representatives. Omar joined them, leaning against a support beam for stability. Omar, Dan said, we were just explaining the Watcher interventions. Ah yes, the 3 times we broke our vow of silence. Omar's voice carried an accent from ancient Earth, a way of speaking that no modern human would recognize. We swore to observe only, to watch and record but never interfere. Norin appeared on the screen. Yet you did interfere. 3 times according to your logs, the Kelrath, the Bornum Hegemony, and the Talth Collective. We had to, Omar said. Each time we saw the same pattern humanity followed: aggressive expansion, classification of primitive species as obstacles rather than potential equals, plans for preemptive strikes. Grace pulled up holographic records. Images of 3 different civilizations filled the air. The Kelrath were the first, About 18,000 years ago, they had conquered 12 systems and were moving toward the Dorn homeworld. The Dorns had just discovered radio. The Kelrath military saw them as future competitors. We debated for months, Dan said. We had promised to only observe, but the memories of what humanity did to the Anari were too fresh. We could not sit by and let it happen again. What did you do? Norin asked. We sabotaged their fleet, Omar replied. Made it look like a reactor malfunction. Their entire invasion force vanished between star systems. The disaster shocked the Kelrath government. They instituted reforms, became more cautious about expansion. The Bornum were different, Grace continued. They were not planning genocide, just enslavement. They called it uplifting, helping primitive species advance, but the reality was forced labor and cultural destruction. We spent decades studying their society, Dan said, looking for the right pressure point. Finally, we found it. Evidence of the Bornum High Council's corruption. We leaked it anonymously to their own population. The resulting revolution ended their imperial ambitions. Norin leaned forward, and the Talth. The three watchers exchanged glances. Omar spoke first. The Talth were the most dangerous. Only 2,000 years ago, they had developed biological weapons, engineered plagues. They tested them on 3 primitive species, wiping out 90% of each population. Grace's hands clenched into fists. It was the Anari all over again, methodical, calculated, evil dressed up as strategic necessity. We could not sabotage them subtly, Dan said. They were too careful, too paranoid, so we revealed ourselves, showed them what we were, an ancient human ship with technology they could not match. We destroyed their biological weapons facilities, all of them, in a single coordinated strike. You attacked them directly, Norin sounded shocked. We did, Omar confirmed. It violated every principle of the Watcher program, but we could not let another Anari genocide happen, not when we had the power to stop it. The Talth nearly united against us, Grace said, declared humans demons from the dark, but we vanished before they could mount a response, retreated back into deep space. They eventually came to see the destruction of their weapons program as a divine intervention, built a religion around it. Dan pulled up current data on the Talth. They are now one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy, dedicated to protecting primitive worlds. Ironic, given what they once planned to do. 3 interventions, Norin said slowly. 3 civilizations steered away from humanity's path. You saved countless lives. We prevented others from making our mistakes, Omar corrected. That is not the same as saving lives. The Anari, the Talman, the Vesh, they are still gone. Nothing we did brings them back. A new voice joined the communication. Council leader Vorn appeared beside Norin on the screen. I have been listening to your testimony, Vorn said. The council is divided on what to do about humanity's return. Some argue your crimes can never be forgiven. Others point to your sacrifice and service. But I have a question that must be answered. Ask, Dan said. The humans on Earth, what are they like now? Your broadcasts show a thriving civilization, but have they truly changed? Or are they just waiting for a chance to expand again? Grace smiled sadly. We have monitored their development for 20,000 years. We have watched their society evolve. They are nothing like the humans who committed the genocides. How can you be certain? Vorn pressed. Omar activated a data stream. Let me show you. This is a typical human school on Earth, primary education level. The display showed human children sitting in a classroom. A teacher stood before them, holographic images floating in the air. Every human child learns the history, Omar explained. Not sanitized versions, not justifications, the full truth. They learn the names of the Anari cities that burned. They learn how many Talman children died. They learn what their ancestors did. The classroom image shifted. The children were visiting a memorial, walls covered in names, millions of names, names of the dead species. They visit the memorials, Grace said. Every child, every year, they stand before those walls and bear witness. They carry the guilt not as something to overcome, but as something to remember, always. They teach philosophy now, Dan added. Ethics, the nature of power and responsibility. Every human child studies the question, what makes a species worthy of the stars? Vorn watched the images carefully. What answer do they come to? That worthiness must be proven through action, not claimed through power, Omar said. That the measure of a civilization is how it treats those weaker than itself. That strength without wisdom is just another form of violence. They sound very different from the humans who committed genocide, Norin observed. They are, Grace confirmed. 20,000 years of isolation forced deep reflection. They built a society around ensuring their worst impulses never resurface, around protecting others rather than conquering them. But we cannot speak for them, Dan said. We are the old guard, relics of the past. If humanity returns to the stars, it will be the new generations who do so. And that decision must be theirs to make and yours to accept or reject. Rillen descended to Earth's surface with the first diplomatic delegation. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere, and she pressed her face to the viewport, watching as the planet revealed itself below. Cities sprawled across the continents, but they were unlike any she had seen before. Green spaces dominated the urban centers. Buildings blended with nature rather than replacing it. Rivers ran clean and blue between the structures. It looked more like a garden than a planet that housed 12 billion people. The shuttle landed in what the humans called Geneva. A crowd had gathered, thousands of humans standing in orderly groups, watching the sky. They did not push forward or shout. They simply waited. Rillen stepped out onto Earth's soil. The gravity felt slightly heavier than she was used to. The air smelled of growing things, rich and complex. Around her, the diplomatic team emerged from other shuttles. Representatives from 7 species, all here to meet humanity face to face for the first time in 20,000 years. A group of humans approached. They wore simple clothes in various colors. No uniforms, no weapons. The woman in front had gray hair and dark skin. She stopped a respectful distance away and bowed. "Welcome to Earth," she said in perfect standard language. "I am President Lin. We have waited a very long time for this moment." Rillen returned the bow, mimicking the human gesture as best she could. "Thank you for receiving us. The Council has many questions." "As do we," Lin replied. "Please come. We have prepared a place for discussion." They walked through the city. Humans lined the streets, watching quietly. Rillen noticed something unusual. Many of them were crying, silent tears running down their faces. Not tears of joy, tears of something else, something heavier. "Why do they cry?" she asked Lin. The president glanced at her people. "Because you are here. Because after 20,000 years of isolation, we are no longer alone. Because we thought we might never be forgiven for what our ancestors did." "Are you seeking forgiveness?" Lin stopped walking and turned to face Rillen directly. "No, we do not deserve it, but we hope for a chance to prove we are different from those who committed the crimes, to show that we have learned, that we have changed." They entered a large building. Inside, a circular chamber awaited them. Human representatives sat in one half. The council delegation took seats in the other half. No barriers separated them. No guards stood watch. Just 2 groups facing each other across empty space. Vorn spoke first through the translation system. "We have studied your history. We know what humanity did 20,000 years ago. We also know of the Watchers and their service. But we need to understand who you are now." A young human man stood. "My name is James. I teach history at university. May I speak?" Vorn gestured for him to continue. "We learn about the genocides from childhood," James began. "Not abstract lessons. We learn the names of Anari poets. We study Talman architecture. We preserve what little remains of Vesh culture. We make them real to ourselves. He activated a holographic display. Images appeared, reconstructions of the extinct species, their cities, their art, their families. We cannot bring them back, James continued, but we can remember them. We can honor what they might have become, and we can ensure their deaths mean something by never allowing ourselves to forget what we are capable of. Another human stood, an elderly woman with white hair. I am Dr. Sophia Wen. I study alien psychology. For 3,000 years, my field has existed for a single purpose: to understand other species so deeply that we could never dehumanize them again. She pulled up more data. We monitor galactic communications. We study every species we can detect. We learn their art, their values, their dreams, not to conquer them, to appreciate them, to see them as fully real. Rillen felt something shift in her understanding. You prepare yourselves to interact with aliens even though you were exiled. We prepare ourselves so that if we are ever allowed to return, we will be worthy of that privilege, Dr. Wen replied. Every generation must earn the right to the stars anew. Norin stood from the council's side. Your watchers told us you teach the truth of your history, but surely you must sanitize it somewhat, make it palatable for children. President Lin shook her head. We show them everything. Every child visits the memorial halls. Every child learns the exact number of dead. Every child studies the faces of the lost species. It is hard. It causes pain, but comfort would be a betrayal. That seems cruel, someone from the council said. Cruelty would be forgetting, Lin replied. Cruelty would be allowing a future generation to repeat the mistakes because we sheltered them from the truth. We give them the burden of knowledge because that is our responsibility. A small human child stood up from where she sat with her school group. She could not have been more than 7 years old. Her teacher moved to stop her, but Lin held up a hand. Let her speak. The child walked to the center of the room. She looked terrified but determined. When she spoke, her voice shook. My name is Ruth. I want to say sorry for what the old humans did to the Anari and the others. I know sorry is not enough. I know we cannot fix it, but I promise I will remember them. I will tell my children about them, so they will never be forgotten. The room fell silent. The little girl stood there crying now, carrying a weight no child should have to bear. But she bore it anyway because that was what her society had taught her was right. Rillen felt tears form in her own eyes. She stood and walked to the child, knelt down to her level. Thank you, Ruth, she said gently. Your promise means more than you know. The child nodded and ran back to her group. Rillen returned to her seat shaken. Vorn stood. The council will deliberate on humanity's request to end the exile. We have seen much today. We need time to process it. Lin bowed again. We understand. We have waited 20,000 years. We can wait longer if needed. But Rillen suspected the wait would not be long. She had seen something in the humans that spoke louder than any words. Not innocence. They were not innocent, but something perhaps more valuable. The willingness to carry the weight of their past into their future, to let it shape them into something better. That took a kind of strength most species never developed. The strength to face your own darkness and choose light anyway. The Dawnbreaker descended through Earth's atmosphere for the last time. Dan guided the ancient vessel carefully, feeling every vibration through the controls. The ship groaned and shuddered. After 20,000 years of service, it was ready to rest. Grace and Omar stood behind him, watching through the viewport as the landing site grew closer. A massive memorial complex stretched below them. At its center, 3 landing pads waited. One for the Dawnbreaker, 2 empty ones beside it, monuments to the idea rather than the reality of the Watcher program. Thousands of humans gathered around the perimeter. Millions more watched through broadcasts. The return of the last three members of the old world, the bridge between humanity's darkest chapter and its hope for redemption. Dan set the ship down with practiced ease. The landing struts groaned under the weight. Several hull plates fell away, finally giving up their long fight against entropy. The engines powered down with a final sigh of failing systems. "We are home," Dan said quietly. They made their way to the airlock. Grace paused before opening it, looking back at the corridor they had walked for nearly 20,000 years. The walls covered in notes and calculations, photos of the species they had saved, reminders of why they had sacrificed everything. "Thank you," she said to the ship. "You carried us well." The airlock opened. Earth air rushed in, sweet and fresh. Dan stepped out first, his legs unsteady on the ramp. Grace followed, then Omar. Three ancient humans, the last survivors of a world long gone, returning to a world that had become something new. President Lin stood at the base of the ramp. Behind her, dozens of officials and citizens waited, but Lin approached alone, stopping a few meters away. She bowed deeply. "Welcome home, Watchers. You have been gone too long." Dan found his voice rough. "We were not sure we would be welcome." "You are heroes," Lin said. "You stayed in the darkness so the galaxy could have light. You sacrificed everything to protect others from our mistakes. How could you not be welcome?" "We are relics," Omar said. "We do not belong in your world." "But you belong here more than anyone," Lin replied. She gestured to the memorial complex. "We built this for you, for the choice you made, for the burden you carried." They walked together through the memorial. Walls displayed the history of the Watcher program. Images of Dan, Grace, and Omar from before their mission, young and hopeful and determined. Beside them, exhibits about the three interventions, the civilizations saved from following humanity's dark path. At the center stood three statues, larger than life, Dan in his pilot's seat, Grace at her engineering station, Omar studying alien data, frozen forever in the act of their service. "We never wanted statues," Grace said. "They are not for you," Lin explained. "They are for us, to remember what service means, what sacrifice looks like, what it costs to choose right over easy." The council delegation arrived. Vorn stepped forward, his expression solemn. "The council has reached a decision," he announced. "Humanity's exile is ended. You are free to return to the stars." Silence fell over the crowd. Then someone started crying, then another. Within moments, thousands of humans wept openly, not from joy alone, from relief, from the release of guilt carried for 200 centuries, from hope that they might finally move forward. But Dan noticed something. The celebration felt muted, careful. The humans did not cheer or shout. They cried quietly, holding each other, processing the magnitude of the moment. "We do not celebrate," President Lin said, noticing his observation. "We accept, we are grateful, but we do not forget why we were exiled in the first place." Vorn continued. "There are conditions. Humanity must share your full history with any species you encounter. You must maintain the memorial worlds. You must never hide what was done." "We agree," Lin said immediately. "Those conditions were already our intention. We will not sanitize our past for convenience." Rillan stepped forward. "I have a question for the Watchers. What will you do now? Your mission is complete. Where do you go from here?" Dan looked at Grace and Omar. They had not discussed this. For 20,000 years their purpose had been clear. Now, for the first time in their impossibly long lives, they had no mission, no duty, just themselves and the weight of time. "We will rest," Dan said finally. "We are tired, more tired than you can imagine." "But first," Grace added, "we need to finish one last task." She led them to a specific section of the memorial, a wall covered in names, billions of names, the Anari, the Talman, the Vesh, every individual that could be reconstructed from records, every life that humanity had erased. Dan placed his hand on the wall. We have carried you with us, every jump between stars, every year in hibernation, every moment of our vigil. You were there. You are why we stayed. Omar knelt before the wall. We could not bring you back, but we made sure no one else would suffer as you did. That was all we could do. We hope it was enough. Grace pulled out a small data chip. This contains our full records, every moment of the Watcher mission, every decision, every doubt. We want it added to the memorial, so people understand the cost, so they know it was not easy or noble or glorious. It was necessary. Lynn took the chip gently. It will be preserved. Your story will be told truthfully, not as mythology, as history. They stood together before the wall of names. 5 species gathered to honor 3 that could not be present, to acknowledge the debt that could never be repaid, to promise that the dead would never be forgotten. Dan felt something release in his chest, a tension he had carried for 20,000 years. He looked at his companions. Grace smiled, tears running down her weathered face. Omar leaned on his support cane, exhausted but at peace. "It is done," Dan said. "We can finally rest." They walked away from the memorial together, 3 ancient humans moving slowly toward whatever future remained for them. Behind them, the Dawnbreaker sat silent on its pad, a monument to sacrifice, a reminder of cost, a promise kept. The galaxy turned around them. Species that had never known war prepared to welcome humanity back into the community of stars. And somewhere, in the space between worlds, the memory of the Anari and the Talman and the Vesh lived on, not as footnotes to history, as the reason humanity had learned to be better. Some lessons could only be taught by loss. Some debts could only be honored through eternal remembrance. And some sacrifices were so profound that they changed the course of civilizations. The Watchers had given everything, and in doing so, they had given humanity a second chance. Perhaps that was the greatest gift of all.